for being with us this morning, this conversation. I know you're in DC. I think that, it's been a crazy year and anything can happen in this year. And obviously you witnessed it from minute one. Now, my question to you is the following. Um, if you can sum up 2020 in one sentence, how would you?
Tragic. It's been a tragic year for our community, for the country, for the world, not just because of COVID, but because of the lack of leadership of Donald Trump. He's destroyed our reputation around the world. He's made our country weaker in every way. And COVID is just a manifestation of the weakness of his leadership. When he's confronted with a tough issue, he delegates it to the governors and to the mayors when it requires national leadership. People are dying because of this weakness. And I weep for the people in our community. I do everything I can to help them. The first time in my career, people have called my office and are crying because they don't have food, crying because they can't get money to pay their rent. And we're the greatest country on earth. We ought to be able to take care of our people.
Looking back at certain things that you've done in the past, beyond the fact that you were Secretary of Health and Human Services, beyond the fact that you were Dr. Anthony Fauci's boss back then, beyond the fact that, but as a congresswoman, you have presented legislation that has crossed party lines, might have sometimes gotten you in trouble with certain Democratic leadership, because when a lot of people weren't talking about this, you presented legislation regarding medical supply to get it away from China, what President Trump has been talking about. So before he was saying it, you were saying it. So, do you think that at least, if you can put things in perspective, do you think that at least what might had he done at the beginning was, put these companies to do ventilators, put these companies to do these things, make sure that the PPE stuff was there?
Absolutely. And, the president has the power to do that. He can use the Defense Production Act and convert a lot of our businesses and industry to produce the products that we needed. And they just did it on the margins. And then they said to the governors, you go purchase this stuff, you go find it. When I was secretary, I moved the production of flu vaccine to the United States because I was so concerned about foreign countries being able to control the supply chain. And we need to make that conversion fast. I've introduced a bipartisan bill, but I've done it on other things. Mario Diaz-Balart and I fighting for TPS for Venezuelans. Our bills to reduce drug costs have been bipartisan. Every time I could, I've reached across the aisle to colleagues. Sometimes in Florida, the Florida delegation fought to permanently ban offshore drilling. The president recently, for political reasons, said that he would do it by executive order. Well, that's temporary. We permanently voted as a delegation to stop offshore drilling. That's what the people of Florida want. And I have worked with Republicans in our district, in our community forever. And your father is an example. I worked with him when he was mayor, and we have a wonderful working relationship. And we got a lot done.
Congresswoman, for people that don't, and this is the Panam Post, so is a digital newspaper that goes through all Central and South America, Europe, Asia, and the United States as well. And it's in English and in Spanish, but a lot of people that don't know who you are, which I doubt it very much, are many, because I think that if there's something that you have broken ground on is especially, and this is a great time to talk about this. Secretary of Health and Human Services, you were the first Lebanese American, go for it, to become a congresswoman. You were the first female president of a foundation when you were president of the Clinton Foundation. You were the first female president of the University of Miami. Obviously, you must be excited about last night's game. On top of that, but on top with everything that has gone, you were the vice chair of the DNC convention for 2020, and that was, something interesting. So, and you've had a couple of, interesting jobs, to say the least, I guess, in the right time, if there's anything to be said about that. You know, when you were Secretary of Health and Human Services, obviously everybody was, dealing with sexually transmitted diseases at that point in time, but you were also going into the influx of the notoriety of autism coming into light, certain things, certain special disabilities. You went out and fought for that then. President, when you were in the foundation, obviously earthquakes, certain things that you geared money towards during that foundation, and it's all about the you. So at the University of Miami, you did certain things that nobody expected to do, and now you're sitting as in the subcommittee of early childhood education. You're in the COVID Congressional Oversight Committee. What can be done at this point in time? We're looking at, there could be already an early resurgence regarding coronavirus. 1,000 cases in New York over this past weekend. At the same time, Miami has gone finally into phase 3. Does that scare you? The fight between the mayors here in South Florida, have you seen this 100%? So how can someone like you, who has come together, notwithstanding the fights that you would have to endure with your party, what do you think can be done?
Well, this demands leadership. Leaders that bring us together, no matter what the risk to their futures. And COVID is going to be among us for a very long period of time. And we have to be very careful to protect our children and who our children might infect if they go to school too early, for example. I think parents are very wary about sending their kids back to school, for example, but we know how to do it safely. But it involves a big investment of money to reorganize our schools. Bringing restaurants back is just very complicated. If you look at Miami Beach, they have 90,000 residents. Last year, they had 10 million visitors. Our community needs to be perceived as safe for those visitors to return, to go on the cruises, to go to conventions, to come for vacations. So this requires the governor, the president, and the mayors to be on the same page of what needs to be done and to speak clearly to the people. In our case, in 2 or 3 languages, to tell them honestly what they need to do. And that includes wearing masks and being careful about sanitation, but it also includes doing the kind of reorganization of buildings to make things safe and protecting our essential workers. And we can't do it without resources. We have the resources. I keep saying, and you probably you'll find this funny, I keep saying it's not Washington's resources, it's our taxpayers' money. What I'm doing is bringing it home so that we can use it to make our community safe. That's my job. That's what I care about. And the economy is going to be difficult to open without deep investments in childcare, without deep investments in our schools, because those are working parents. And some of these jobs will never come back, so we have to create new jobs. And I think a deep investment in infrastructure, boy, our community could use infrastructure. Just a simple thing like we've got 100,000 septic tanks. We need to raise our streets, to buy pumps, to build walls, seawalls. I mean, to redo our streets and our bridges. But it's our money. And the point is we need to bring it home.
Congresswoman, when we wake up here this morning to the information where Superintendent of Schools Alberto Carvalho said that the school was going to open up October 21st, little by little, and the Secretary of Education for the state of Florida says no, you need to open up by October 5th, and if you don't open up by October 5th, you have to give me an example for every school. When you wake up and you hear that the mayor, the county mayor, not the city mayors, but the county mayors, wakes up and says, you know what, we're going into phase 3 because that's what Governor DeSantis says, and you no longer will get fined if you're not wearing a mask in public. Do those things scare you, alarm you, put you at a point where you're like, okay, this is that lack of communication that you're talking about?
Yeah, and it's more than that. It's the constant need for Tallahassee to tell local governments what to do. I believe the people of Miami-Dade, working with their school superintendent and with the mayor, ought to make the decision about how they want to manage COVID-19 and particularly how they want to protect their children. I don't know the Secretary of Education, but I know this. He's not living in Miami-Dade. He doesn't have children going to Miami-Dade's public schools, and he ought to stay out of our decision to keep our children safe.
Now, moving on to other subjects, before we go into international relations, you are in Washington. You obviously have been in the halls in this couple of days where Republicans and Democrats keep fighting over the nomination for the new Supreme Court justice. You obviously were at the final farewells to Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Your whole take on all of this?
Well, first of all, let me say that Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who I've known for 40 years, was an extraordinary jurist and an extraordinary human being. There's no question the president has the right to do the nomination, but the Senate promised that it was inappropriate to do a nomination when Barack Obama tried to nominate someone during an election year. We're 37 days from an election. We're starting to vote in a week or so in Miami-Dade, and I think that they should have delayed this until after the election. There's no question that the Senate, the Republicans in the Senate, have the votes, but my preference would have been that they delayed the vote until after the election, because the people ought to have an opportunity to speak on this. And 60% of the population in this country, Republicans and Democrats, think that the vote on the nominee should be delayed. I don't see the big deal about delaying it, but I don't think they're going to do that. I think they're just going to ram it through. And I won't comment on the qualifications. She is clearly a brilliant jurist. Her philosophy is not my philosophy. I prefer a more centrist person in that job. But the president does have the right to make the nomination, but the Senate ought to have delayed this nomination until after the election and listened to the American people. The president should have listened to the American people. She's replacing a giant in American jurisprudence, and Ruth Ginsburg hadn't passed away for 24 hours before they jumped on announcing that they were going to make a replacement. I thought it was in poor taste, but it is what it is. But this election is about healthcare. This election is about our survival as a country. This election is about life and death. And that's what I'm worried about with the governor making these pronouncements. Maybe opening too early because he's not following the White House guidelines. He's opening earlier, and I understand the need to open the economy. But we need to put the resources in to protect our essential workers, to make sure that we can do the construction that's necessary to make our schools safe, that we can protect people that can't go back to their jobs, and that we can protect small businesses. And that's what I prefer to focus on at this point in time.
Congresswoman, going back to one thing there that you just spoke about right now regarding COVID, and you being the ex Secretary of Health and Human Services, and being on the COVID congressional subcommittee, do you think that the pharmaceuticals are moving too rapidly regarding um, the famous vaccine marathon race?
I depend on the scientists for that. They are moving rapidly. There's no question about it. The real question is, are we going to do a review once they present their findings that's so rigorous that it protects human life? That's the most important thing. It's the FDA and that scientific review. It's normally done by outside experts, and apparently they intend to continue to do that. The governor of New York is worried, so worried that he's going to set up his own panel to review the data. The data will be transparent and available. And so I'm much more worried about the president saying, well, maybe I'll overrule the FDA. What scientific expertise does he have? We need to reassure the American people that whatever the vaccine is, it is safe. It's not the speed, it's safety. This is about safety. It's not the date, it's about safety. And we need our best scientists to review the data and to say to us, this is safe and it's time to distribute it to save lives.
Congresswoman, regarding the equality part of this, the first Congresswoman was Jeanette Rankin in 1917. We are right now in 2020. Many, many years have gone by, and we are right now, we're at the legislative level. You're looking at a 23.7% of women sit in that chair, 127 exact right now. You have done forefronts in your milestones and in your career. Do you think that equality is not there still?
Of course, it's not. We don't have enough minorities representing, we don't have enough women. Women are half the population in the United States. We are not half of the United States Congress. I think it makes a difference what people's backgrounds are. I think the fact that I come from a working class community, that my family, my mother's side, has lived in Miami-Dade since the 1940s, that having roots in the community, coming from different backgrounds really makes a difference. And particularly gender, I think makes a difference because people have different experiences. And I don't think that there's anyone in Miami-Dade that would say that it wouldn't be a good thing to have more women in Congress.
Do you think that in this whole fight between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party regarding gender equality, because they have accused the Democrats accuse the Republicans of not being so inclusive, but yet you look at the last 2016 election for the president, and the candidates on the Republican side were Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Ben Carson. You had some amount of inclusion there. Um, Obviously, and then you looked at the Democratic Party back then, and it was more white Anglo-Saxon than anything else. And then you look at your own community, and you look at certain names, and you've been, one of the coolest things, one of my favorite shows is Survivor, and obviously you were a survivor. You were a designated survivor at one point in time of your life. So you look at that, and you said, hell, is it a Republican Democrat uh, conversation, or is this more of a general conversation saying, African Americans need to be in both parties, Hispanics need to be in both parties, women need to be in both parties, type of thing?
I agree with that. I want both parties to be representative of the country. Different ideologies, different approaches, different ways of thinking about public policy. but I don't think we're strong as a country if everybody's in one party versus diversity is in one party versus another. I think it would enhance the Republican Party to have more diversity. I welcome it. I just think that our parties ought to represent our country, not parts of our country, but they ought to represent our country. So I'm for it. I could work with people of all kinds of backgrounds. I grew up in a neighborhood that had people from every place. Look, I'm Lebanese. The Lebanese went every place. I have Cuban relatives. I have Brazilian relatives. I have Mexican relatives. I have relatives from Argentina and Australia, because the Lebanese spread all over the world. So I think it's good. We're a country of immigrants, Native Americans. We have our first Native American women in the Congress. It's very important to hear different voices. That's when the country comes together.
So recently you were endorsed by ex-President Barack Obama, but yet, even though you were endorsed for them, you were not, let's say, and I guess this is your bipartisan thinking, you were not so happy with certain things that administration and the Democratic Party has done regarding obviously the communist dictatorship in Cuba, communist dictatorship now in Venezuela, and the dictatorship in Nicaragua, and what they've tried to do in the past in Colombia.
Some of this is out of my own personal experience. I hate dictatorships, and what the communists have done in Cuba, in Venezuela, the socialists in Nicaragua has been a disaster. Not only for the people there, but for our own community. I have friends who were in prisons in Cuba for years and came to the United States. I know Venezuelans that are struggling and starving in Venezuela that cannot get proper medicines. And so, I come at it and try to work at these issues from a bipartisan point of view. Joe Biden has a slightly different take, but I like the way he talks about Cuba, that we're not going to negotiate with the Cubans unless there are conditions. We don't give anything away if we're going to talk to the Cubans or anyone else on earth. Maduro must go. And I have stood with my Republican colleagues and my Democratic colleagues in South Florida and made it very clear that we will do everything we can. We passed TPS. We passed my bill to stop the Venezuelans from buying any kind of military equipment from the United States or even independent sellers of military equipment in the United States. We've passed humanitarian aid. These have been bipartisan bills. And I have fought for TPS for Nicaraguans, for Venezuelans, and fought against this administration's deporting people to Cuba, to Venezuela, to Nicaragua, to El Salvador. If you saw the people that we work with, that we try to help in my office, it would bring you to tears. I don't agree with the administration on family reunification. It took us 1.5 years to get 3 little kids back here with their parents from Cuba. They had signed all the papers. It was before the president made the decision, but closing down the embassy there meant they had to be interviewed. They were staying with grandparents. The grandparents either died or had a stroke, and it took forever. The parents here were in a panic. They're working class people. We finally got the kids here. But it took everything that we had, including phone calls from me, to beg the embassies to let the kids come to come and be with their parents. And so we need an immigration policy for DACA kids, but also for people that have been here forever, to find a pathway to citizenship, not just a pathway to legality, a pathway to citizenship. They've been good citizens as far as I can tell.
Congresswoman, when you hear that President Donald Trump says that all the options are on the table, which gives some type of hope to the Venezuelans, saying, there could be a military invasion. We could be the next Panama. The United States could send SEAL Team 6 into Venezuela and take out Maduro in Miraflores, and you know the politics very well. I mean, uh, is that a false hope?
Yes. I just don't think there is support for the president invading Venezuela. We need to get the Europeans. The one thing Joe Biden can do that Donald Trump cannot do is, while we've put pressure in the Americas on the Venezuelans, we have not gotten the Europeans on board. Joe Biden could get the Europeans on board. Without the Europeans putting enormous pressure on Venezuela, without Spain and England and France and Germany putting enormous pressure, and without dealing with the Russians, which Donald Trump won't touch them, we're not going to get any serious movement in Venezuela. So I am for building an international coalition. And I just think that Joe Biden is more likely to do that than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is despised in those places. They don't have a lot of respect for him. And so we need a lot more help to put enormous pressure on Venezuela, because this illegitimate regime is not going to bow to pressure. And I think Donald Trump is just pulling at people's strings because he has no intention of invading Venezuela.
So when you hear John Bolton and you read his book, or you hear all these ex-military officials that worked for him saying that he's not going to invade. In fact, he probably said with George Stephanopoulos that everybody thought that he was the person that was going to go to war, and he has gotten his troops out of certain countries. And you hear and you see the suffering in Venezuela. You see the immigration problem that it has caused in all of Latin America. This is something severe. And you hear the Venezuelans asking the United States for the TPS here in the United States. And this, pretty much right now, we're looking at Rick Scott had presented one, you have presented a TPS, and then there was another TPS presentation by Senator Menendez a couple of weeks ago, but yet nothing is going through. Is it a Republican Democratic fight right now, or is this let's just protect the wall, and this has to be one little piece of that wall?
There are two things we should do immediately. Number one is we have passed TPS bipartisan in the House of Representatives. We have sent the bill over to the Senate. They need to act. They need to find a way to act. And so far, Mitch McConnell has not scheduled it. Number two, we need to send aid to Colombia, to Peru, to Brazil. I mean, where Venezuelans have gone, millions of them, we need to help those countries, or we're going to destabilize them. We need to help those countries cope with this huge migration of Venezuelans who are desperate. I went to the border in Cuba, and I stood there and talked to Venezuelans, sick, hungry, desperate, pregnant, desperate Venezuelans who begged for our help. And the Colombians are helping them out of their own resources. We've given them some resources. We need to give them more resources. We need to do the same thing for Peru, for in northern Brazil. There are Venezuelans, and it's very important that we do those two things immediately. But TPS for Venezuelans, by the way, I think the president probably will do it the day before the election or something. It's just like him to be cynical enough after saying no, 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 no. You know what the White House indirectly said to me? Well, the president just doesn't want to expand the number of immigrants to the United States. He just doesn't like immigrants. So he's not going to do TPS. He's not going to add another group legally. That's outrageous. That's outrageous. And the House of Representatives has stepped up, and Joe Biden said his first day he'll sign TPS for Venezuelans.
Moving on to Cuba, do you think that the situation with Cuba is one of these crock pot situations where it's been simmering and simmering and simmering, and it's already, the food is ready? I mean, and this is ready. It's gotten to a point where people have finally, I guess, are not as scared anymore to speak. Is it just now, just that little inch that we need? I mean, you have Cuban Lebanese family, and we all talk about this all together. I mean, those who have Cuban families and the Cuban Lebanese community is very tight knit one. So I can tell you about that. And we all talk about that at this point in time. You know, is it ready to explode?
It may be. It may be, and we ought to do everything we can, but we ought to protect the Cuban people at the same time. I worry about them. I worry about their healthcare system collapsing. They export doctors as a way of getting income, slave labor, as far as I can tell. I worry about their healthcare system. I worry about the access to food. When my family came here a decade ago, they were selling furniture in Cuba so they could get enough to eat, even though the head of household was a dentist, was a professional, and his wife, who is my cousin, was a teacher. And we have to keep that pressure up, but at the same time, I just don't want to destroy the lives of the Cuban people. So it's a very delicate, very delicate balance. But I stand with my friends and neighbors here in Miami in my hatred for that regime and what they've done to a absolutely magnificent country.
Last question, because I know your time is limited. I know it's easy to be a politician in Washington. I've been a correspondent up there for many, many years. Has it gotten harder to be a public servant?
It has, in the sense that things are more partisan. I spent years in Miami working with Republicans and Democrats, so I am comfortable, but it's very partisan. And my colleagues on the other side of the aisle struggled the way I do because, there's some fear of Trump, of losing their seats. But quietly, we try to get some things done, but it's much more difficult. The interpersonal relationships, we used to be able to go out to dinner, and it's not just because of COVID, and have those relationships. It's just gotten much tougher. And it's tougher to be a public servant, to work in government now. You can see the president beating up the great scientific enterprises. The CDC, the FDA, the National Institutes of Health are the greatest scientific enterprises in the world. They have world-class scientists who have protected our lives and the people around the world forever. And we have to be careful to maintain them as world-class institutions. That's the kind of thing that will protect the people in Miami-Dade.
Congresswoman, you replaced a titan of a woman, also someone who has worked as bipartisan up there in the Capitol as you have, and you both caused a bit of commotion this year when you invited her, Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, a Republican, to be your guest at the State of the Union. That caused commotion everywhere because it caused commotion for you across the street in the DNC. It caused commotion for her in the RNC. Is that your way of saying, look, I took this seat and I am going to show everybody that you can work bipartisan even in this polarized capital that we're in?
Absolutely. And we had such fun. We went to the Republican reception with Kevin McCarthy. He couldn't have been more gracious. He was very excited to get to see Ileana. She's been a friend of mine for 20 years. And I thought sending a message of bipartisanship, also of friendship, was important for our community. The heck with the DNC and the RNC. We had such a good time. And then I took her to Nancy Pelosi's reception, and Speaker Pelosi gave her a big hug, greeted her warmly. And by the way, at the Republican reception, I was also greeted warmly. It was a lot of fun, and who cares whether the professional politicians in both of our parties were upset. They should get over it, because the future of our country depends on our ability to work together.
The last question, a message to your voters, a message to all that are watching you in this conversation, your future plans for the next 2 years. What is your future goals that you would like to continue?
Well, my goals are to make sure that everybody in this country has good health care. That COVID is squeezed and starved, not just here, but all over the world, and particularly for our friends and neighbors in Latin America. I'm focused on healthcare and on bringing our economies back, but I'm also focused on our children. I've said this before. I represent the kids. The adults will do fine. It won't be perfect, but my job is to anticipate the future and to make sure that every child in our community, whether they're born in Star Island or in Little Havana, has the same opportunities. And I see myself as representing the kids and their future and anticipating the future for them. So that's what I'm going to do. And God help me to get reelected, and some voters too. And we're just going to get a lot of things done in the next Congress. So thank you very much for an opportunity to talk to everyone.
Congresswoman, thank you so much. We really appreciate this conversation and really appreciate you. And obviously, in a personal standpoint, we salute you because for all that you've done for our country for so many years. Thank you so much for this interview.
You're welcome.
All the best. Thank you, Congresswoman. I really appreciate this. I